I want to bring up another follow-up quote from Ms. Sultana. I don't think this is a socialist idea, at least aligned with Marxism. If we're going to change society, we have to center the most marginalized people. Yeah, my theory is that the problem with the left in general is that you have this PMC or NGO professional class, and then you have their favorite lumpen of the year, and they kind of go together. And it's like, look, we're going to showcase, I don't know, furry, polyamorous, non-binary people, or we're going to find the most matrix of oppressed person, and we're going to shine a light on them, and we're going to raise their voice, put a softer face on the capitalist machine, or etc. And another thing I want to get your opinion on, this idea that the more inclusive you are, the better. The more irons in the fire, the more mixer in the drink, the more potent the political force. And I think that's ass backwards. But what do you two think on any of that? Or feel free to just pretend I said whatever allows you to make an important point. That's always an option.
Well, Zarah Sultana's running a bad photocopy of a photocopy of the original writings of those who founded Euro-communism, which is the movement that emerged post-60s amongst the Western European communist parties, where they started to decenter working class struggle and bring in all these other things, not as expressions of class politics, but freestanding. So you bring in environmentalism, but it's not the environmentalism of the working class. It's just the kind of environmentalism that ultimately morphs into the Green Party and NGOs. You bring in certain varieties of racial politics, but again, it's filtered through essentially like a declassed thing. So it's like, we're now going to represent black people as if there's no class division, amongst the black population.
Thus, white people just go around and say, we're sorry about that and feel really bad about it.
Feel bad, move on, or don't. But the point about it is, if you look at the Zarah Sultana's tweets and Corbyn's, to be fair, because he's no better, they'll mention like a strike every now and again. They'll pick one out to talk about that the trade union bureaucracy is pushing. They'll say, oh, we want better laws for workers, that kind of thing. We want more trade union rights. But that'll then go alongside like trans rights now, or like we want justice for the Palestinians. They won't really say what that means, but also we need to stop the Uyghur genocide, or maybe the trans genocide.
Free Tibet.
Free Tibet.
Back to the feudal hours, baby.
Yes, bring back the Dalai Lama and his somewhat dubious ways with children.
Fear would not steer us wrong.
For Zarah Sultana, like the contradictions with her are huge, because on the one hand, she says, oh, I'm an anti-Zionist, we need to stop Israel. Okay. She also backed the regime change war in Syria, which is now run by a man, al-Shara or al-Jilani or whoever he actually is, who is a obviously paid agent of Britain, the United States, and Israel. And the destruction of the Ba'athist government of Syria aided principally Israel, Britain, and the United States, with Turkey in the mix as well. Where's your consistency here? Do you think about things for more than 5 seconds, or do you just grab a slogan and tweet about it? Or is it the case that this is more sinister and like you will disagree with certain things that the British state does, but when it comes to British state priorities, such as destroying Syria, Zarah Sultana, by the way, notably regularly denounces Putin's tyranny, makes noises about the tyranny of the Chinese, etc. So when it comes to the really big issues that the British ruling class has a real priority over, which are continuing domination over the entirety of West Asia, doing over the Russians in Ukraine, destabilizing the CPC government in China, Zarah Sultana's all on board with that. In many respects, either she's a fool who just gets easily led around, or she knows exactly what she's doing, and she understands what her role is, which is that she's the left face of British imperial politics. Because that's looking like the more likely explanation, because that's consistent with the Labour left's entire history post-World War II, and indeed before that, well, apologies.
So she's kind of like the UK Barack Obama.
Yeah, he's a better actor. It's more like the British version of AOCIA, you know?
Okay. Oh, that's true.
Yeah, it's not just on the international stuff. I think it's on basic bread and butter issues as well. That everything they say feels like it's been through the NGO machine. So, they talk about housing is like a major issue. Like it is like one of the biggest issues facing the country. And I mean, these people have had a long time to think about it and become experts on these subjects. It's not forgivable for them to just come out with a little soundbite. But what's the first thing they jump on is rent controls for private tenants. It's not a national house building company. It's not a massive investment in building thousands and thousands of council homes or a return to the model of council housing. It's a tried and proven to not work strategy for making things a little bit better for renters in the private sector. Now, I'm not saying I'm against rent controls, but that's what you get when you have a bunch of government funded NGOs that are set a way to think about something that isn't really going to shake things up.
And that's again the inclusivity. What can we get everybody or enough people to agree to that's not going to cause any problems and sounds good?
That won't bother the big money makers at the end of the day, that won't bother the housing associations and the developers that are making all the money.
Okay, so we've covered the objective conditions and subjective conditions that make your party hysterical pregnancy type party. Great for British imperialism or global capitalism, but from the perspective of at least what I think all three of us would agree on that the left is quite an abomination. Just want to kind of recap in terms of the objective conditions that we're facing. So you have a stagnating economy, you have increased hollowing out from the imperialist system, you have NATO wars, you have increasing financial dominance and real estate and this type of thing. Then with subjective conditions, at least on the left, either the people are disillusioned and are just like, whatever, you're not going to get me again. Or you get this, if we can get Corbyn and if they can, not to call each other names and to be nice, if we can get them over the finish line, then, socialism on the horizon, whatever that means. And I'll wrap up this long question to both of you. In what way, again, does your party and Corbyn and Sultana, misrecognize the terrain? We'll give them the benefit of the doubt that they say what they mean, offering kind of a fantasy instead of a strategy that's really going to be able to make any dent in any long-term change that gets us out of this kind of declining empire, to plug Alexander and Kit's Decline and Fall.
Well, just briefly on the objective conditions that you mentioned, which is where you've got a late stage imperialist economy, which is what Britain is, which is heavily financialized, more so than even the United States is. There's much less of a manufacturing base. There's much less of an actual productive base upon which you could actually properly base like a reform program that social democrats used to want to implement. What you've got is a parasitic economy. You've got a non-productive economy where when the government tries to make investments into, say, infrastructure building, the budget balloons beyond all recognition. Money drains off through various different parasitic companies and entities that sort of drain resources at every single stage. Because, of course, in the post-70s period, which are referred to by certain academics as the neoliberal period, the positive shout and scream about taking on bureaucracy creates many bureaucracies, but privatizes them all. And so every single investment program becomes entirely inefficient. Now, that's important because if you're going to outline like a big capital spending program, which is what Corbyn says he's in favor of in a sort of vague way, and you don't change the way that the state is organized and run, well, then you're just going to pour good money after bad. I'll use the example of the NHS budget. Everybody argues about how much money they put into it. But what Corbyn did mention briefly when he's Labour leader, to be fair, but not enough, was how much money drains out through privatizations and it drains out through semi-private and fully private bureaucracies. And this is the way that the British state is structured now. It's structured to redistribute money into various different parasitic entities, private companies, banks, etc., with the banks playing the leading guiding role. Now, how are you going to reform that? To use Laura's example of housing, the reason why they run scared of actually doing anything about housing is because if you go near that, if you say we will return to a mass council house building program, that's the end of the property price bubble, which started to inflate when they started to destroy council houses. Now, if you're going to pop that bubble, that means very rich people are going to be very, very angry because you just basically cost them a load of their investments. Also, a lot of other things are invested in the property bubble are continually expanding, like pension funds. So if you're going to go near that, then you better have a good plan for when these people who control a lot of money and a lot of influence launch their fight back. Or do to Corbyn, for instance, what they did to the beloved, the late, the unlamented Liz Truss.
Yeah, your party lasted 1.57 Liz Trusses. And for people who don't know, when Liz Truss started getting a lot of heat after her, and I can't remember his name, released their economic plan, and it caused a lot of problems in the financial markets, which is, of course, the big no-no. Somebody put a live camera on a head of lettuce, and it was like, what's going to last longer, Liz Truss being the prime minister or this head of lettuce?
Mm.
And I think the lettuce actually.
Well, yeah, the lettuce would probably have been there for Jeremy Corbyn as well had he won with the Labour Party, because if they're prepared to do that to Liz Truss, if basically the Bank of England governor is prepared to come out and orchestrate a coup against the sitting prime minister, which is what Andrew Bailey did, well, then what would they do to a Corbyn government? It would be capital flight on a massive scale. They would say that the pension funds are on the verge of collapse, which means millions of people's retirement savings are about to go up in smoke. And they'd do that. They would bring it to the point of collapse to get rid of somebody that they didn't want. And when they'd achieve their objectives, they'd say, oh, suddenly things are calm again. You get like IMF bailout on steroids, etc. The point I'm making here is that these people do not make clear to their followers what they are up against because they're not serious. I think Corbyn on some level does comprehend it, does know what his role is, which is to offer a few tiny crumbs. Because if he's offering tiny crumbs now, what would he actually deliver in government? Like microscopic crumbs. It's true for all of these like new left parties that broke through across Europe. Ultimately a collapse. Podemos ultimately ends up in a very compromised coalition led by Sanchez. Mélenchon ends up basically trying to prop up Macron. I mean, you probably deny that. So the British state is very repressive. But it's very repressive because the economy it oversees is fundamentally very fragile. It's all leveraged, built on debt, and it needs a continual infusion of state funds to keep the parasitic model going. And if you're going to try and do that, then you need the mobilization of the working class en masse to fight back against the pressure that the ruling class will bring to bear on you. And Corbyn's sort of milk and water TUC consultation exercise is not going to do that. In fact, it's going to turn the working class off, I would say.
So are you saying that if they got pushback, that you're not confident that they'd be good political fighters? Are you saying that it wouldn't be enough just to gather at Brighton and to pass the microphone around and ask everybody how they feel about the vitriol that's coming at them?
Some very hateful rhetoric out there, and it needs to be confronted.
Yeah, and also with AOC in the States, talking about fascists. Now, if they actually came across a fascist, they'd piss their pants and just like play dead. I mean, I might do that too, but it's fantasy land. They seem to think if they could just tone the rhetoric down and get back to kind of this kind of bourgeois sensibility or keep calm and carry on, and somehow that in of itself is going to protect us from fascism. But I'm unconvinced.
Their big plan will be to talk a lot about fairness and a lot about we want nice things. This isn't to say for a minute that people like of my politics don't want to see the working class win something. This is not what we're saying. The problem with the social democrats of today is that I don't think they understand for a moment how to actually win anything. To actually get anything out of this system now would mean being able to mobilize workplaces and communities in a big way to actually bring pressure to bear on existing political and economic structures to frighten essentially those in power, with the alternative being if they don't concede something, then the next phase is, well, something much more serious and much more of a threat to their interests. So to get everything out of the system takes a level of mobilization and militancy, which these people are wholly incapable of. And not only that, when such campaigns would start, or such campaigns have existed, the ruling class inevitably fights back, and these people are nowhere to be seen. They'll run away. Just like the TUC bureaucrats, when a strike gets real and out of their control, their instinct will be to sell it out. Because it's too militant, it's too scary, it might alienate the middle class. The market's scared. I don't know. I might not get my seat in the House of Lords. So some people accuse people like myself of like, oh, you don't want to see the working class win. No, we do.
You're a negative Nelly.
Yeah, well, there we go. But
Bastard, sorry.
we have no faith in the ability of Saint Jeremy or Saint Zarah, the Blessed.
Saint of male vaginas and female penises.
Well, yeah, the male vaginas can be used as a great excuse to not get involved in the kind of mobilizations that Alex is talking about, as I've seen in my own life, like a few times actually. Actually, small numbers of people, if they're prepared to be militant and if they're prepared to really put the pressure on and to actually devote a lot of time and effort, can win things. And that's why the powers that be, the establishment, put so much effort into crushing even the smallest campaigns, because wins are powerful. And it's funnier this time round. I mean, it's sad because the stakes are so high, but when Momentum to try to get Corbyn elected showed up and everybody sort of flocked to it, I mean, it was almost like watching that slow car crash was like, you were constantly asking yourself, is he trying? So a lot of people that would not have joined the Labour Party ever, including a lot of former comrades, people that I used to be in the SWP, and a couple of split off from it after that. And I remember telling my father years ago when I was at uni, and he told me, mark my words, Laura, they'll all end up in the Labour Party. And I said, no, they won't. Don't be silly. Not these people. And then Momentum came around and they all ran off and joined the Labour Party. And I was like, wow. And that was baffling, you know. And then we watched it unfurl and we saw how lackluster and useless he was as a leader back then. And it was kind of, you were constantly asking yourself, is he being crap on purpose? Is this a deliberate thing? Is like, are we being played? And now we're doing it. I mean, it is possible to win. A small number of people can achieve quite a lot, and then you can build on that, you know, and that's how you build. You build through campaigning. You can't skip that part and just get some guy with a bit of power and a bit of a following to lead you to victory and to socialism. It's especially not somebody who, at the end of the day, his class interests are different. Because these are not working class people, but everybody somehow expects them to stand up for working class interests. And at the end of the day, I don't think they're going to do that. So you don't get to skip over the bit where you actually build working class power and just get some rich guy that was perfectly happy. I mean, these people were perfectly happy when they've been in the Labour Party. They were colleagues for ages. Now they're supposedly trying to lead something that's a real sort of radical movement for change, that they're falling out all over the place. So it's not that we don't want people to win or that we don't think that they can. It's that we don't think this is the way forward. And also, just in case somebody whinges at me, I know he did say that he wanted a mass program of council house building. But my point is, you know, like any 15-year-old can say that he's not outlined any kind of serious plan for how he wants to achieve them. And if you asked him, I'm sure he'd say something vague about a wealth that would just melt.
Yeah. And just to wrap up on this part, if you're going to confront the issues that need to be confronted, you need to have a certain amount of militancy, which doesn't mean that everybody has to be militant, but you have to have a militant core. And again, I think one of the things that sometimes I think maybe by design, but maybe it just kind of happened, that the more you focus on intersectionality or inclusivity, you decrease the possibility for that militancy. I think it pacifies it on purpose.
As you said, I have said before, and others have said too, that stuff like gender ideology is basically designed in a laboratory by various dubious academics and agents of the state, is because, well, look at the effect that it has. As Laura said, it's a great excuse for doing nothing. So, oh, well, we can't possibly work with those people over there who are horrendous transphobes. We can't possibly work with those people over there who are horrendous racists. We can't possibly engage with this community because there's too many problematic opinions in there. It's a great excuse to basically sit around in an office somewhere or a union office. My God, the people have failed us again because of the prevalence of unacceptable views, which is what Zarah Sultana like going with that comment. Because this is, again, the fake politics that you're served up. Like, you are given the simulation of real struggles. And that's, you know, not just gender ideology, I would argue, that's what anti-fascism has become in Britain and in the United States, no matter what Donald Trump says about Antifa super soldiers or whatever it is today. It is a simulation. It is basically a simulation which recreates elements from when anti-fascism was a real thing back in like the 1930s and recreates it via the NGO system. And it pretends to be a struggle. But like, how can you be struggling against racism and fascism when saying vote Labour, which is part of the source, part of the source of division? And I remember making this point years ago, and people would say, "Oh, well, there's some people in the Labour Party that are very nice." And it's like, well,
J.D. Vance is nice. Trump is charming. Hitler was probably lovely at parties. And I'm not saying they're all the same. I know this drives you crazy. It's like, but they're so nice. It's like, well, and people can say really bad things in a very nice way. Anyway, in terms of getting your guys' opinion on this kind of, whatever we want to call it, this Corbyn style social democracy, NGO, feel good inclusivity type of thing, viable at all? Or has it become completely anachronistic? And on that, I want to connect this notion that some people have of like the post-war, so like the late 40s to early 70s capitalism in post-war Europe and the United States. The idea that somehow that was the norm. Instead of being a blip or a fluke or just kind of an outlier, the idea that we can have that kind of capitalism everywhere, which implies a kind of social democracy welfare state. Do you think that there's still a lot of people who, even if they say they're socialist, is that like the horizon of what they want to get to? More kinder, gentler, higher taxes on the rich, this type of thing. And if that's even in any way plausible that we have now, could revert back to make that a possibility, even just Britain-wide.
I'll say that the experience of like 45 to 75 is an aberration. And even to get to that level of like reform, which did genuinely take a lot of working class people's living standards forward, certainly did in my own family. But to get to that point took decades of very bitter class struggle in every major urban center and workplace community across Britain, much of which has now been sort of buried and forgotten. But to even get to the point where there was a Labour Party founded took like decades of campaigning for the franchise by those who fought and died for it immediately after the Napoleonic Wars, by the Chartists, by the early trade unionists. And it took most of the century to get even the votes that would make a parliamentary Labour Party possible. And then it took like decades of struggle and the creation, by the way, of a global center of revolution in the USSR to actually make the kind of social democracy the Labour Party always said it stood for into something which would become viable because the ruling class was so fucking terrified they gave up reforms. Now, not only is there no Soviet Union anymore, the Chinese aren't interested in exporting revolution. They've made that abundantly clear. But you also have all of the imperialist countries into an advanced stage of parasitism. So you need to undo that. You can't smooth the edges off that. Because not only is it non-productive, as the terrible rates of economic growth in all of the Western countries show, but also like it's fundamentally unreformable. And if the party actually took power in this country that was serious about changing things, the number one thing you would have to do is nationalize the banking system. Because it's the banks that essentially control everything and the state which continually bails out the banks. So essentially you already have like the ingredients there to start addressing this if you wanted to. But Corbyn doesn't want to. And more to the point, to answer your question, Tara, in my experience, and I've been around like the British left for over 20 years, which is a painful memory to indulge in, what they want is essentially welfare capitalism back again, which again, the historical conditions which produced that have gone. We've moved into another phase. So you can't just recreate it and you can't just magic out of the ground the kind of productive economic base that you would need to base that on. You would need to fundamentally commit yourself to fundamental changes, which are going to cause a lot of disruption, where therefore, if you are going to get through that as a political movement, you need the mass of the working class on board. And you can't get that when you've got Zarah Sultana giving them the middle finger from day one. All not acceptable. We don't want you. Well, you can't afford to operate like serious political organization. And to go back to Mr. Galloway and his party, they, at certain points in their existence, seem to have something of an understanding of that. They've wandered off into something else now. you can't start off by saying the following people are unacceptable if you're serious about doing the kind of reforms that they say they want. It tells me they're not serious about any of it because they don't want the actually existing working class. They want some nice middle class people to sit down and have, I don't know, organic tea and cucumber jam at Jeremy's allotment.
So, sometimes humor helps. So don't count your chickens. So there's all this excitement about the Your Party conference, and they have this incubator, but they're all empty. It's just us. Still the same. Again, laugh or cry, people. I'm in the same boat. And then hysterical political party. This is a Your Party sonogram. There's all this excitement, and I get the excitement. I was like, oh, this seems like it's new, and it's not going to have all the things that held us back, and Corbyn and Sultana. So you have like the wisdom and the youth and this and that. And so it starts growing like somebody's belly who's having a hysterical pregnancy. And they go to the doctor, and the doctor has to say, yeah, I'm not. So, sometimes you have to try different ways to make your point. Okay. I'll bring the clip of St. Jeremy talking about democracy. And then we're going to get Alexander's maybe 6 steps for when you find yourself wanting to get excited or to hope again about Your Party or Corbyn 3.0. This time he means it. This time it's going to happen. Alexander's going to go through some tips and tricks to help ground you and to fight off going down the same cul-de-sac yet again. So I'm going to share my screen and play that little video.
800,000 people have signed up to join in that. 800,000 people who want to see something different. The process that we're going through at the moment has been, you're obviously aware of it, quite difficult over the last few days. But I am absolutely determined this party will be founded. This party will have its founding conference in November. This party will be open, democratic, and grassroots based, and will be a party that excites and mobilizes in their community to achieve a better thing in their community, and will be a real alternative to the false offer and the lies and the racism of Nigel Farage with form of the far right within our society. We need an organization to do that. At the moment, despite what some people have discussed endlessly on social media, is that the alliance group of MPs saying together, organizing, not to run it, not to control it, not to direct it, merely to facilitate it.
All right. Sounds like a recipe for a whole lot of nothing, but maybe I'm too cynical. Anything you want to say about Jeremy's forceful rhetoric?
I think I fell asleep. You better.
He's as exciting as ever. We covered this earlier to a degree, but this, we're not going to be in charge. We're just going to facilitate something. I was going to be blunt. This is bullshit.
Yeah, been there, done that.
Before I was a Trotsky, I was in anarchist groups, okay? I was in a non-hierarchical collective. And
lovely.
Led by a man who said we shouldn't have leaders, but he was in charge. And this is the thing about this kind of amorphous nonsense beloved of social democrats. They love to say, oh, I'm not in charge. You're driving this process forward. But in reality, the decisions have been made by a small group. And what Corbyn's got in mind is getting together a bunch of very nice people, I'm sure all the people you saw there, his groupies, going wild.
They're going to fight fascism, Alex.
Right now, they're throwing jars of cucumber jam at it.
Pronoun guides.
And they're going to check that fascist privilege so hard. But what they will do is have these talking shops. This is the People's Assembly stuff. Everybody remember the Enough is Enough campaign with Mick Lynch and Zarah Sultana going around telling everybody to vote Labour? Yeah, I remember.
Enough.
Enough apparently wasn't enough because when Keir got elected and basically carried on most of the same policies that Rishi Sunak had been. So they loved these talking shops, which are completely controlled by a bureaucracy. And here I'll just go back to the interview I had myself and Kit Clarenberg, because what David Miller and others, including the likes of Phil Bevan, who researched this, is you've actually got a very narrow layer of bureaucrats from the trade unions and also very shady types who are sort of British intelligence assets running all of these different organizations, which all overlap with each other, which all basically define what this thing called the left is, and which are sort of setting the policy agenda for your party. and who are run by a small clique, which Corbyn is surrounded with and will not leave. He insists on these people being in place to run everything. So here's the question. If he keeps making the same bad personnel decisions, surrounding himself with people who run these organizations which define what the left is, which are run bureaucratically by a small group who, again, have very dubious connections, then what role is he playing? And this is where I'll get to your point about how you should people should assess this correctly. Don't let your desperation overwhelm you. Look at Corbyn's actual record. Did he mobilize the working class or not? No, when he was Labour Party leader. Did he empower the membership of the Labour Party, which at one point reached 600,000 allegedly? No, he did not. Did he enable them to dispose of people who were Corbyn's avowed enemies? No, he did not. He defended those enemies. And now he surrounds himself with the same people who made all those decisions 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. So that's not a mistake. That, in my view, is the action of a man who knows what his role is. And his role is to principally, as you were saying, provide jobs for the boys and some girls and some people who don't know what they are, and to secure basically the left bureaucracy, which is who really he speaks for and represents. And if you look at his reign in the Labour Party and the mess that's already being made in your party, the only way you can actually conclude an analysis like that is that Corbyn himself is not, as that Haas guy was saying, the man who was within 200 votes of socialism.
The natural leader of the left in the United States.
But in a sense, that's right. Because this is the left. This tortured bureaucratic mess is the British left. This anti-working class nonsense is the British left. So in that sense, yes, he is the perfect leader of it, but I don't think that's what Haas had in mind. So if you actually do an analysis, you actually think this through and don't get blinded by your own desperation. And the desperation is understandable given where we are. Then you can only conclude that this is a con game, because it is. And don't be afraid to draw the conclusion that the current left as it stands is a joke and needs to be got rid of, because at least then you can liberate yourself from the plague of false hope and false dawns that afflicts me.
Thank you, Laura. Do you want to say anything about any of that or anything else on or around this topic?
No, I've been lulled into a stupor by Corbyn's powerful speech making. I guess it would be nice to end on a slightly more hopeful note. At the end of the day, politics doesn't just happen in the ballot box. You know, I do think it's important to engage. I feel like the second you have a go at your party, people come out the woodwork and start accusing you, oh, you do nothing and you just stand on the sidelines criticizing.
Yeah, and I'm just like, I'm sorry that I said something bad about your political crush.
Maybe people are emotional about it because they're like, oh, I had hope and now you're crushing it. But the point is, class struggle goes on regardless. If Reform wins the election in 2026, a class struggle continues and anti-Rix's work and all the rest of it continues. I think people need to stop with this, oh, this is our one opportunity to stop fascism. It's kind of the same as we've got smaller pro-independence parties here in Scotland going, 2026 is the independence election. It's our last chance. It's like, stop saying that. All you're doing was giving your enemies the ability to, well, that was your chance and then you blew it. But the way I see it, whether you want that to overthrow the system completely, whether you want to return to social democracy, or whether your, main thing is just to break apart the British Union and have a future for Scotland, what you need to do is the same. You have to organize, you have to campaign, and the demands are the same. You try to claw back a little bit of power and a little bit of dignity from capital in the interest of people. And that is how you build people's sense of being able to actually achieve something and being engaged.
Political education,
yeah. That. And it's grueling, boring work that doesn't come with a lot of plot. Occasionally you find someone that has a bit of power, a bit of a platform that will lend it to you. But at the end of the day, there is no substitute for class struggle. And that's what we all need to keep at.
All right. So just to wrap up here, I'm going to say that I don't think it's a stillbirth. I think your party, it's a phantom pregnancy. So all this enthusiasm and buildups, but then it's just the same old, same old. This is getting everybody so excited and they think that there's something about ready to be birthed, but it's really just going to be old wine, new bottle. So we're going to keep going between denial, arguing, anger, bargaining, and depression rather than trying to accept the situation that we're in, which doesn't mean, like Laura was getting at, you just say, F it, whatever. What we have to try to get out of is not spending time and energy, especially bringing younger people in or people who haven't been political, to have it quashed again, to have it end up in the same place. I mean, everybody can be wrong and everybody's partially sided, but try to be as honest as possible with the situation as it is, to be able to reach acceptance about where we are, where the left is, whether it be in England or Scotland or my crazy country, to have an acceptance of that the left is as much, if not more, part of the problem than whatever is going on the so-called right, is what I would say. And on that note, I'll turn it over to you two.
Just to conclude, what Laura said is absolutely correct, which is that class struggle isn't something that gets turned on and off. It's a constant. It's a battle that is waged by the ruling class against the working class constantly, and the working class finds ways to resist constantly. And that doesn't hinge upon any parliamentary savior. So what needs to be done really is that the working class's awareness of itself as a class needs to be drastically improved. The reason why people get sucked up into like the performance act of Yaxley Lennon enabled by Elon Musk, etc., or voting for reform is because this is the explanation that is given to them by all of the different media sources that they listen to, both established and fake alternative. And what used to happen through the trade unions and through the old Communist Party, flawed though it was, there used to be people who were out there in a serious way in communities and workplaces being able to present alternatives to people and being able to mobilize people around core sets of demands. Now, if you do that now, then people actually want something and could see a real tangible victory for themselves in their own lives, in their workplace or their communities, then the words of Farage or Yaxley Lennon would lose their impact. Because fundamentally, that's the politics of despair. Because these people's only program is kick them out, which, by the way, they won't do. But that's another story for your immigration episode, Tara. It is a politics of pure despair. And if people start to believe that they, as a collective, as a community, as a workplace, as a class, can win something, then that changes the dynamic. It is in the ruling class's interest to make sure that working class politics means racism. And therefore inexcusable for leftists to agree with that, which is what a lot of the people associated with like the hierarchy of the British left do say. So there's no reason to be despair. It just means you have to realistically assess what is actually required. And what is actually required is you have to go out and talk to a lot of people who are going to be difficult to talk to, who are going to have all kinds of views about all kinds of things. They're all over the political map. And unless you're prepared to do that, well, then you might as well pack up and go home. Or maybe become an official of the TUC.
Thank you, Alexander. Laura.
I mean, I think we're at a point, especially in Britain, everywhere in the West at least, where making basic social democratic demands really looks like radical revolutionary action. It's the same thing for us, like the getting the women out of hotels and the raising awareness of the homelessness crisis is how we combat the racism stuff. You know, it's part and parcel. At the end of the day, their reform, etc., are winning because they're making this shortage of resources argument, and it's cutting through because people are looking around and going, well, yeah, I can't get a house, or my friend can't get a house, or I can't get a job, you know, and instead of making the point that we need to be combating the rise of slave wage labor that's going on and the blatant lack of housing and services, people are just going, oh, no, the problem is everyone woke up one day and decided to be a fascist, and it doesn't work. So yeah, if you actually present actual explanations to people and actual solutions, and I think in Scotland, we have the luxury that we are a small country. We're a very resource-rich country, and we could actually solve a lot of these issues really easily. And if you can actually put that to people, you also show up the Yaxley Lennons, etc., for the frauds that they are, because it shows they don't actually care about presenting solutions to any of these problems.
And a big hint is if Elon Musk shows up at your Take Your Country Back rally, you may want to give it a think. Just going to throw that out there. Comrades, thank you very much. I really appreciate this. I always learn a lot and enjoy my time with you individually or together. So thank you very much. Please do like and subscribe. If you have any ideas for future shows, books that we can review, guest topics, etc., or anybody out there want to come and be a co-host, please let me know, and I'll see you next time.